I've come to talk to you about delight, a word that I think is overused, misunderstood, and most importantly, under threat. Under threat from the dark forces of the four horsemen of the design apocalypse. We have lean, we have agile, we have the headless horse rider analytics, and finally, designOps. And I'm going to talk about each of these impending threats that we have in a short while. But I really want to use this talk to make a case for delight, and hopefully to get you to join the resistance movement for the right to delight. So I'm Chris Howe. I work at ClearLeft. I help clients with my colleagues in many sectors create impact through better design. The views I'm going to express are not necessarily official ClearLeft policy, or not yet official ClearLeft policy. So I'm going to start by trying to articulate delight. This picture you'll see a few times in the deck, and it comes from sitting in a load of usability testing sessions and going beyond listening to what people were saying in the words they were using, but the sounds they were making, and using that as a way of really trying to get into, were people being delighted or frustrated or angry with the things that were being presented to them. And I think you get that the whole time when you do usability testing. You get people that just give that involuntary ah, or meh, or wow. And those sounds, I think, are really important to be listening to. So as designers, researchers, developers, project managers, I think it's our responsibility to deliver the wow in the products that we make, in the services that we create. And through having that wow, what we do is bring real value to organizations and clients. So I'm going to frame with some examples this scale of delight. I'm sure you will have many examples of your own. I'm going to caveat it, though, with saying that I don't think anybody goes to work to do a bad job and create something awful. But bad things happen. So I'm going to start at this end of the scale, the anger, the frustration, the ah and the with a few examples of awful usability. So I think you're shipping shite rather than delight if you don't say no when somebody says, could you design some instructions to read an article? It's our responsibility as designers to go, there's a better way. I think you're shipping shite if you don't understand the data you have to work with and the content that is available. I was asked to do usability testing on this, and I thought, you don't need to do usability testing to know that that is awful. And then on the right-hand side, I think you're shipping shite if you don't understand that if everything is shouting, nothing gets heard. So with all of these, you hear that kind of from users, and we don't want that in the stuff that we're designing. And it's not just in a digital world. I strongly believe the efficacy of design lies entirely with the people who encounter it, the people who are consuming it, and not the creator of that design. So when you're speeding down the road at 60 miles an hour past this sign, it's rubbish, it's awful design. So I think you're shipping shite if your intended audience have to work hard to see and understand your message. Now, I'm a charitable guy. I think letting untrained designers give it a go is fine, but I think we should judge design by the results and not the charitable intentions. If any of your children did this, I'm not going to apologize. We also see it in physical product design. I think if you're not solving a problem for a user, and a real problem a user has, then you're shipping shite. I don't know if anybody has tried No More Tea Bags instant tea. This is a real product. You can buy it on Amazon. It makes an awful cup of tea, and it's ergonomically more difficult to use than a tea bag or loose leaf tea. There is no delight to be found here. And that's what we're after. We're after trying to find the delight in the stuff that we make. So back to our scales of delight. I'm sure you've all got lots of examples of things that you use, things that you encounter, that give you that anger, that frustration, that make you... Urgh. Let's go to the other side of the scale, the more important side of the scale, the ooh and the wow. It's amazing when you're in a usability testing session, somebody goes, wow, you know you've nailed it at that point. So I think there are, at that end of the scale, lots of different types of delight. There's the obvious kind of design porn, the stuff that you see on awards or Dribble. It slightly frustrates me with those examples that although they are incredibly beautiful, they never express the problem that's trying to be solved with the design. So you're only able to judge them on aesthetics. You never find out the constraints, you never find out the context, you never find out who's going to be using it. You merely get some beautiful pictures. So it becomes a battleground for beauty rather than anything else. And I think delight is more than just surface beauty. I think delight can be small and charming. Optimal Workshop have a piece of software that we use for card sorting. When you've created a card sort, there is some friction in that process. But when you set up your card sort, they then celebrate you launching a test by giving you a downloadable paper aeroplane cut out. You fold it, you can scribble over it, you can throw it to your colleague across the studio to celebrate the fact that you've launched something. It feels appropriate to their tone of voice. It's something charming. It's something not obvious. I also love it because at some point there has been a meeting and a designer has gone, I've got this idea, and everybody's looked at that designer and they've gone, a paper aeroplane? We're a software company. What on earth are you doing? So somebody has had to fight, somebody's had to advocate, somebody's had to battle for that detail to go into the design. And that's what I want us to be fighting for, those details. So this morning there was a 40th celebration. When you get into the next decade, you realize that some of the things that delight you are not rock music and going out. I've got 3 examples of things that I find delightful in my 5th decade. I think hoarding, as Jay was saying, hoarding is really important as a designer. If I see things in the internet that I find charming, delightful, helpful, usable, I take a screenshot of it, and I borrow those ideas. I go back to them, I refer to that scrapbook when I'm stuck in designing. And I think it is really important to grab the best of stuff in order to be informed by it. I think all 3 of these examples are united by the fact that they are delightful because they respect the user's time. Time is our most important thing that we have. As designers, we should be designing things that support people to make the best use of their time, or if it's something they don't necessarily want to do, just get it over with really quickly. So on the left-hand side, we've got a lovely little touch from Ron Seal. If you go on the Ron Seal website, you're looking for varnish because you've got a weekend ahead of you of varnishing stuff. There is a calculator. You put in your measurements of the area that you want to varnish, a piece of data that you would know. It then tells you how much of the product you need to buy, and importantly, how long the job's going to take. And that's kind of really cool. You can then start planning your weekend around that task. They've also got some lovely copy. As the volume and the length of the job changes, the copy changes. It becomes really addictive. You go, what's the biggest job I can do at home to get different message? The one in the middle, I don't know if anybody's tried to buy a wheelbarrow wheel recently. It's not something that you want to be spending a huge amount of your weekend doing, believe me. But if you go to B&Q, it gives you various ways of buying it. And importantly, it tells you in your local store how many are in stock and where to find it. I managed to change, I'm sounding like an F1 mechanic here, I managed to change a wheelbarrow wheel within 45 minutes using this website. I'm proud of that. If there was a popper, I'd want somebody to pop now. And the final one, Difford's Guide. It's not just DIY in my life. Difford's Guide have a great encyclopedia of cocktails, really good content on their site. But when you use it, you are in control as a user. You choose the size of the cocktails you want to make, how you want to measure them. And it then gives you where you can buy the products to make that cocktail. It will tell you how many it makes, and it bundles it all together. So with one touch, you can buy from Difford's or the Whiskey Exchange or Amazon everything you need to make a margarita, which means you can think about having a cocktail on a Friday morning, and by Saturday morning it's been delivered. I think that's a good use of users' time. Now, delight can be ugly, but useful. I think people get fixated by delight having to be beautiful. I'm going to call out Total Jobs for not being beautiful, but being ugly. But they've got a lovely feature on their site. You look for a job, you enter your postcode, it will then give you how to commute to that job and the time it's got. And that follows you around the website, sets a cookie, goes on subsequent visits around the website. So not beautiful, but maybe delightful. Certainly helpful. A few more delightful examples. At Clearleft, we, a couple of years ago, did an online exhibition for the Wildlife Photographer of the Year, which is just opposite the hallway, well worth going to see. And the delight in this was putting users in control. We took some concepts out to various people that wanted to use the website, including photographers who were entering their work into this competition. And two features kept coming back as the kind of the killer features. One of them was deep zoom on images. And initially there was an idea that the photographers wouldn't want that. You know, they were putting their work online. Previously they were fairly kind of apologetic, small images. They wanted you to go to the exhibition. But the photographers were saying, no, we want people to see the detail. So deep zoom on images was one of them. And the other one that kept coming up, and people were going, wow, even when this was at sketch level, was being able to use filters to take this incredibly large archive of images and be able to get a personalized set of stuff you were interested in, and more importantly, have a shareable URL where other people could then go and see what you'd created. So if you were particularly interested in seeing all the mammals in Africa and Latin America that have been photographed since 2020 that were winners in categories, you could do that easily. If you want to see all the black and white images of dolphins in the Northern Hemisphere, you could do that easily. It allowed people to play with stuff. And I think delight is often getting out of the way of users, giving them flexibility, giving them control, allowing them to discover the content you've got in the ways that they want to get to it. So delight can be putting the user in control. Delight also comes in physical products. I think delight, when it's really at its best, is when it's meaningful and memorable. So this is a storybook from Argentina. It's about the environment. It's written to encourage children to look after the Amazon. There's beautiful images in it. I don't speak Spanish, so I don't know what the story's like, but the images are beautiful. The important thing about this book that I think is delightful is the pages are impregnated with seeds. And the final page of the book encourages you to plant the book and let it grow as flowers. I think there's an element of delight there that is really appropriate to the product. And I think making it appropriate to the product really helps. We heard this morning about sustainable web. And I thought there were some really fascinating things in there. Innocent have recently launched on their website a green switch. So you come here, and initially it's not green. It says this website uses a certain amount of energy. You can turn that energy down. You might upset the designers. I find that really offensive. You'll upset the designers by turning it down. You hit the green switch, and it says this website looks a little bit more shitty, but you're doing your bit for the planet. I think that probably is an example of delight being in the marketing department's part of the world. Is it delightful? Well, it does something that is encouraging, makes you think potentially. But when it comes to sustainability, I prefer this approach. So this is Low Tech Magazine. It's a website that is solar powered. They could make this a progressive web app. They've decided not to because that doesn't help tell their story. What I really like about the delight of this is it lives its values. No sun, no sight. I think that is delightful, but I think it's delightful because it's appropriate. So I think delight elegantly uses design to solve problems in interesting ways. Some of you might recognize this as a Finnish passport. You have a flip book that is a walking elk. And the flip book is not only delightful, you've got something to use in the airport, but it prevents fraud. It's a way of making the passport harder to print. So this is delight at a national scale. I think this is great. Wouldn't you love to be in that meeting that says, should we have a goose? Should we have a swan? No, we're going to have an elk. It makes me wonder, what would Britain have as their flip book? If anybody's got any ideas, come and tell me later rather than shouting out, because it'll be rude, I'm sure. Boris Johnson walking across your passport. OK, we're talking about delight. I'll get back to delight. Not to be undone, the Norwegian passport just over the border tackles fraud, the same problem, in a different way. The passport on the left is what it looks like in daylight, and when you put your passport under a UV light to get it recognised at the airport, it shows the northern lights on the right-hand side. So every time you're checking out of Norway or coming back to Norway, you've got this delightful moment that reminds you of home. And I think that's kind of important. I think delight stands out from the crowd. It puts a smile on your face. It's small moments, but meaningful moments. So back to our scales of delight. So we've done the left side, the ah and the We've done the ooh and the wow. I'm going to talk about the middle, the meh. And I think too much design sits in this horrible middle. It's meh. Nothing gets done here. That's the problem with meh. It's not enough of a problem to fix. You know, it's not shit. It's just meh. It's okay enough. Isn't that awful? If you go to work and you design something, you make something, you craft something, and people go, yeah, it's okay enough. I mean, that's not how I want to spend my days. And that okay enough is where I think most of undelightful design gets leaked out into the world. And I think our responsibility as designers is to take the meh and move it up the scale. So that really leads to that question of why doesn't delight happen? And I think in some ways, these are the reason. Back to our four riders of the design apocalypse. Now, I am going to slag these things off, but not out of spite. I think all of them have a lot of credibility and use in the work that we do. I think lean, agile analytics and designOps, it's often how we've employed them, how we use them, that leads to that meh. So design for me is the currency of delight is the currency of design. As creators of products and services, we add the most value to people when we add delight to the stuff that we do. And I think some of these processes, and I'll go through each of these in turn in a minute, are being misused and making us do more meh rather than wow. So let me kick the tires of lean for a minute. Which companies don't want to be lean? Releasing early and often, having a learning mindset. What I often hear from clients is we build, we measure, we learn. We've got this great cycle going on. But what I tend to see is we build, we ship, and we forget. And if you're not iterating and building, measuring, and learning, and then rebuilding and remeasuring and relearning, you're not doing lean. The biggest culprit with lean, I think, is a word that I'm going to find it hard to say, so I'm going to whisper it. MVP. So if you opened a cake shop and this was your MVP, you would be out of business in days. MVP shouldn't be about the minimum. I think with the MVP, we should be looking for the desirable in it, making sure there is something that catches somebody's imagination. We don't have to make everything, but it's got to have something good in it. And I'm not saying we should go for the other end of the scale and have super elaborate scope creep. This is the Queen's wedding cake, which is definitely a case of scope creep. And a usability issue. How does a 5-foot woman cut a 9-foot cake? She has staff, I guess. What I'm saying about MVP is we should be looking at thin slices of delight, making sure that we have quality over quantity. It's about releasing small amounts of delight rather than smearing that base of the cake. Minimal but lovable products. If you release something every week, make sure there is some delight in that every week. Our second rider of the design apocalypse, I think, is Agile. Now, I'm a huge fan of the Agile manifesto. I think it is philosophically a great manifesto. I think all Scrum Masters and Agile practitioners should be forced to reread that every year to remind themselves what Agile actually is. That promise of Agile being nimble, encouraging experimentation, allowing the people who are crafting things to be able to pivot when they get insights and information. That's a world that I think we should be aiming at, and I think that helps create delight. Unfortunately, I see Agile being used as the methodology in a lot of web teams that makes us like factory workers. Factories were awfully dull places. Raw materials come in, you turn a handle, widgets come out the other end. It's not a place that has room for initiative. It's not a place that is usually used for innovation. The factory floor is not a place usually for delight. So why do we set up knowledge workers, and we're all knowledge workers in this economy, to start working in systems that were designed to produce and mass produce things in the Industrial Revolution? In many cases, I see Agile as being the factory floor of the digital age. And you get designers that are just sort of battery farmed, churning stuff out. I'm a free-range designer. I'm proud of being a free-range designer. I think it's in the wrong hands. I think in the wrong hands, Agile goes awry. As a product owner or a Scrum Master, if you're working with those people, here's the challenge that I'm going to set you. When they're asking you in stand-ups, what are you doing today? How long is this going to take? Occasionally ask them, why are we doing this? It scares them. Their eyes just kind of glaze over. And if they can't answer that, then they're not doing their job properly. Agile is not about just producing more and more stuff. It should be about producing better stuff. Right, on to the headless rider, analytics. Headless, and I often see people that use analytics as headless. So let me make this really clear. I love having insight and data to inform my work. I just think analytics is used in a way in many organizations that makes it, we've got a fact, and this fact is what we're always going to be doing. I often see analytics teams as being the kind of the flat earth brigade of the digital world. They've caught hold of a number, they can prove this number over and over again, therefore it must be true. Google Analytics should be there to inform us, but it shouldn't be there to direct us. We should be using the insight and then using our judgment, using our skills as creative craftspeople to use that to help us rather than be dictated by it. Just because Google Analytics doesn't measure something or easily measure something doesn't mean it's not worth measuring. I think Google Analytics has got us into this world of we're looking for quantity instead of quality. When we kick off a project, we will often ask the question of, what's the measures of success? How will we know if we are on the right track, if this product, this service is successful? What are the signals we should be looking for in order to do that? And I'm so disheartened when the answer immediately comes back, more page views, more visits, less bounce rate. And I have to work really hard to go, how are we going to measure joy? How are we going to measure the excitement people might have, or the long-term impact we might have on the users of our products? Google Analytics doesn't do that. Later on, I'm going to give you an analytics tool that does get us some way to doing that. I also have that problem when it comes to delight of analytics people, because they've got numbers on a spreadsheet, always trump the meeting. You get all the creatives that are going, we've got some concepts, we've got some ideas, we're going to throw these things out, have a discussion about it, and then somebody boots up Excel and says, I've got some numbers, we shouldn't be doing this. And somehow those numbers always trump the concepts and the ideas. One of the pieces of data I started to throw back at people, it hasn't always been successful, is to ask them how much trust they have in their numbers. So the annual Barracuda report in 2021 showed that automated traffic on the web makes up 64% of that traffic. We now have more bots, scrapers, spiders in the system than we do humans. That always scares people with analytics. They don't quite know who's coming to their site. Is it human or is it Android? At one point in 2013, YouTube announced that they'd reached that tipping point. There were more bots watching videos on YouTube than humans. And they spent a huge amount of time trying to get the robots out of the system. Don't know if they're going to win the battle. Wouldn't it be lovely on YouTube to have most viewed, but most viewed by robots and most viewed by humans? I mean, great. I would watch some of the robot stuff. You know, they might know stuff that I don't. But I think the point is, data doesn't provide immutable facts. As designers, we should be using that data to inform, be inspired by, rather than not challenging it. So the final rider of the design apocalypse is designOps. And I know that all of you are going, oh, Lego bricks, oh, for God's sake, he's going to talk about patterns and Lego bricks. I've used Lego bricks here, though, for a good analogy. In Danish, Lego translates as play well. Lego should open up creativity and possibility through semi-structured play. And for me, particularly pattern libraries should be doing that. I see a lot of organizations not wanting the Lego bricks. What they're really wanting is the Lego sets that tell you exactly what to make. Here's the picture on the front, go make that picture. Don't divert from that picture in any way. Don't use your creativity. That is anti-Lego to me. I was speaking to a designer recently at a large, but I will say, I'm not going to name the organization, but you would have all heard the organization. We put some ideas forward to them for some interaction patterns and said, we can't do that. That's not in our pattern library. So I said, well, how long have you had your pattern library? He said, oh, just under a year. Okay, so what happens when you want to devise anything new? Well, it's not in the pattern library. I was like, it's not made of brick, mate. It's pixels, for God's sake. These things should be living documents. If your patterns, if your components aren't a living product, if you can't change it, if people don't know how they can add to it, then it's not doing the right job for you, and it's not helping you with delight. Now, I like a system. I started as an information architect, really like a system, like constraints. I find design guidelines like this from NASA and the Munich Olympics fascinating documents to read. I find them really inspiring. I just think in the digital world, we need to readdress that balance to make sure that we're using, particularly pattern libraries, to gain consistency, but we're not losing flexibility. That we're using pattern libraries to be informative, but not restrictive. A successful pattern library, to me, should aid and not stifle creativity. There's a concept from architecture that I think is really useful when thinking about pattern libraries and delight, and that is the duck and the decorated shed. It's a phrase coined by Robert Venturi and his partner Denise Scott Brown, and they divided buildings in the world into either ducks or decorated sheds. The word duck comes from these kind of buildings you see in America down the highway that express the purpose of the building by the design it has. And you might be familiar with buildings that look like hamburgers or Shell petrol stations that have the Shell logo. The opposite of the duck is the decorated shed. The kind of structure that has no identifiable purpose if you take its signage away. So think IKEA, Metro Bank, Sports Direct, McDonald's. And I want to live in a world where there are more ducks than decorated sheds. I want to go online and find more ducks than decorated sheds. So websites can be decorated sheds. I think if you start with Bootstrap and you say, this is what we're going to use to build a website, and that's your end point rather than a starting point, then what you've got is a shed, a decorated shed. Equally, websites created using AI, Draftium, Weblium, are two examples. Isn't that an awful idea? Websites created by artificial intelligence. What a horrible, soulless world that promises. I think they're decorated sheds. You know, press a button. I've got an e-commerce site. I'll press a button and spin up an e-commerce site. Now, I get Jacob's law. I get that your users spend more time on other people's sites than your site. Therefore, familiarity is something that we should be aiming for. But I think the test is if your pattern library doesn't free up the time from the repetitive work in order to explore the inventive stuff, then it's not helping you create better. And that, I think, is the acid test of any pattern library, any design system, is it frees up your time to do the more interesting. So duck design has impact. It puts a smile on your face. Who wouldn't want to have a cup of tea in the Chinese Tea Museum? What excites you more, the Chrysler Building in New York with its glistening spokes and wheels, or the monolith of Trump Tower? You can answer that yourselves in your head. If you've answered Trump Tower, this talk isn't for you. Who wouldn't want to work in this building? Now, you know, you might say that's a piece of ugly architecture, but every time you went to work, you would be reminded of the product that you made. I think it would put a smile on your face. And I think it brings that point that delight doesn't just happen. You have to go that extra step. You have to make the effort to delight. You have to push the boundaries. You have to find the time. So what can we do about this as designers? Well, I think sometimes you find superheroes in odd places. So this is Noriako Keino, a Japanese economist and design delight superhero. He carried out a lot of research around quality and customer satisfaction. And his Kano model, I think, is a really useful tool for designing for delight. And I'm going to go through 3 ways that we use this at Clear Left to help us get more delight into design. So I'm not going to give a lecture about the Kano model. I think many of you will be familiar with it, except to say there are 2 axes. One is customer satisfaction, goes from frustration to delight. There is another axis that is investment or cost. And we then plot 3 curves on that. We start with the basic expectations. These are the table stakes. These are the must-haves. If your product doesn't have these, then people will walk away from it. important to note with basic expectations, there is decay in delight. Today's standout features are next year's basic expectations. Think about a car now. It's Wi-Fi. Most cars Wi-Fi enabled, got all the heating in. My first car wasn't like that. They become the basic expectations. Then there is this middle thing called the performance payoff. The more features you have, the more the quality improves. But they come with a cost. And the more features you add, there is a cost in building and maintaining those. And you're in an arms race, a features arms race. We don't want to be there. And then the top curve that I'm going to concentrate on is the excitement generators. This is where delight happens. And we use this model in three ways through projects, through the life cycle of a project, from evaluating current and future projects, in generating ideas, and in measuring appeal. So the first thing that we do when we're looking at a product, a future product or a current one, is to use the Kano model to map out the features that are in it. So we'll write each feature on a Post-it note, put a big printout of this up on a wall, and we'll get clients and the team at ClearLeft to start plotting what makes up this product. And we do that against both of those axes of cost and satisfaction. And seeing the whole of a product broken out in that way helps us to answer three key questions. Are there any delighters? We can then ask the question, if there aren't, how can we add delight? How can we move one of those things up into a different curve? And also, are we making the delightful features easy to discover? You might have something that is a delighter, but nobody uses it. So seeing the whole is really useful. We then use it when we're creating ideas, sketching, and then through the whole cycle. And we're using that Kano model to say, where are the opportunities to add delight? In critiques, where are we putting the delight? We use it in creating our backlog as well, making sure that the delight isn't pushed to the icebox. I'd really recommend in Trello or Jiro, add a tag, delighter, and make sure some of that stuff gets done early. And then we also use it to measure products. So there's a survey technique in the Kano framework that allows you to ask paired questions on each feature and systematically get back a way of get back some data that you can plot on a graph, and there are tools online to do this that allow you to identify which features add the most excitement. And this is a really good way for the analytics folk to be able to take that to a client and say, in your product, current or future product, these are the features that you should be shouting about. These are the ones we should be spending more time making and marketing. So without delight, the world gets a little more vanilla, a little more beige, a little bit more meh. As researchers, developers, designers, our job is to put the wow into the world. And I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying it's going to happen every time, but I think it requires a voice of dissent to stand up for delight. I think it's a fight worth fighting, and I'm going to ask you to join my design resistance movement. I've got some badges with me today. I will give them out in the break. Come and grab a badge from me. But if you take a badge, you are under oath in the next 2 weeks to stand up for delight in the design work that you're doing. Thank you for listening to me, and let's keep up that fight for delight.